All right, I believe we should be live. Welcome back to another episode of GM Philosophy Coffee Break. GM Philosophy in the afternoon or the morning, if it's morning where you are. And I'm not drinking coffee today. I'm drinking a Rockstar. But today we are talking about running D&D without any prep work. What do you do when you are going to run a D&D game and you have done zero prep work? What happens if you show up at your game with the rest of the players? You're a player. Hey, Bearded Devil. Bearded Devil's in the chat. John's in the chat. How's it going, guys? Let's say you show up to your game. One of the players gets a phone call and says, guys, the GM has just dropped out. He's not making it. He has to drop out. He's moving away. We have no GM. We have 5 players and no GM. And they look at you and they say, will you GM for us? Will you start a campaign tonight? Let's start a campaign. Let's go. Let's start playing D&D. What are you going to do? Can you do it? Is it possible? Should you do it? These are really good questions. And in these live chats, what we do is I give my 2 cents as we go. And then we also defer to the chat. And we get questions from the chat, get advice from the chat. So it's going to be an awesome time. We're going to hash through this. Charlie says, Wazah, how's it going, Charlie? Garrick says, hi, how's it going, Garrick? Now, we already have some thoughts in the comments. Bearded Devil says, I'm going to make a prediction. GM Josh is not going to provide a salient distinction between zero prep and being unprepared. Mikey the Goat, how's it going? He says, hello. Hello to you too. So this question of zero prep versus being unprepared. So it's like, I think the distinction here is like on one hand, there is just not preparing. It's like, oh, I'm the GM, but I'm not going to do any prep work. I'm just going to show up and just riff, right? There is no doubt a lot of improvisation that goes on in a D&D game, especially if you're the GM. With that being said, I find it a little bit disrespectful to the players when GMs just show up and they do not have any prep work done. Even if you like to improvise, when you get some prep work done and you know what you're going to do with a session, you've got your world state stuff, you have maybe some maps, you have maybe some ideas for antagonists, you fleshed out some encounters, whatever, then you can riff on top of that. And it's usually going to be better. But just going in completely improv and doing no prep work, unless you've like talked to your players about that before, I don't actually think that that's a good way to GM. I have GM'd a lot that way. And I'll be honest, I don't think that I performed at my best when I did that. I always perform at my best when I do like enough prep work to give me a foundation. And then I use that as a launching pad for improvisation. With that being said, what we're talking about in this video is literally going off the cuff. Like another example might be you're in the game store. You're standing around, hanging out in the game store like you do for 5 hours on Friday night. And the game store owner walks up to you and says, hey, would you, just this wild question. We have a game going tonight and the GM didn't show up. I know you, GM. Would you be down to like just run a session for these players, right? So it's like, you had no prep time. You're thrown to the wolves. How can you do it? What should you do? I actually have some steps for this. John says, oh, wait a minute. Chris says, greetings from Florida. Hello, Chris. Good to have you. John says, I feel like zero prep is only successfully possible if the players are okay with disregard for the rules. There's a point, there's a point to that. You're not entirely wrong about that, I don't think, because rules may suffer if there's zero prep. Unless you're going to take a bunch of time to look up stuff while you're playing, unless you just know the rules really well. Not a jester, not a con says, what's good? Hey, what's good? Charlie says, you need at least a sturdy baseline. Completely blank isn't an option. I agree on that. John says, like zero prep means I don't even have stat blocks either. I spend half the time looking stuff up or I make it up. Yeah, actually, that's actually the key, I think. You either spend it looking it up or you make it up. And in my case, I would opt to make it up rather than look it up. Garrick says, my quality is always less if I'm not prepped. Can do it, but not at my best. For sure. I agree. Okay, so here's my first step for this. The first thing, like, let's just say we're going into a situation, though, where we had zero prep time. We literally had zero knowledge we were going to run a game. But then, boom, for some reason, we have been chosen by destiny to run the game today. We have like 4 or 5 players looking at us, waiting for us to start. The first question is going to be whether or not they have like characters. You have to create characters somehow. You can create characters while you play. You can tell everyone, you can like slide everyone a character sheet and say, okay, name, species, class. We'll flesh the rest out as we go. And then every 10 minutes or so, you can kind of pause and say, oh, by the way, everyone roll me dice for your primary attributes. And then after a little while, it's like, okay, while we're playing this next section, everyone select what skills you're proficient in, or like whatever, right? You can you can build as you go. And I actually have done this a couple times. I don't usually get put into these situations very often, so that's not something I've done a whole lot. But you can do that, But let's assume that characters are created for some reason. Like maybe there are pre-gen characters or random characters that you have available. Everyone's going to have a character. So we're kind of launching from that. Let's see here. John says, or I'm sorry, wait a minute. Charlie says, oh, we've already talked about that. John says, same flow is key. Elder Goblin Games, what's up? Hey, Elder Goblin Games, how's it going? So anyway, what we want to do then is be like, well, what do we do? Like, there's no baseline, there's no backstory, but people do have characters. So what now? Okay, here's my first step. I just think of the first idea that comes to me, the first idea. So what is that idea? Right now, just off the cuff, I'm thinking to myself, you all wake up in a tent. You hear the wind howling. It's beating against the side of the tent. The canvas of the tent is flapping, and you feel warm because you're in like a comfy bedroll, but your face feels cold. You realize the temperature is very low. And of course, when you look at the door of the tent, you see that the flap is flapping. You see that there's snow nearly covering the entrance to the tent. So you look around, and then I would tell everyone, you all, you're all waking up. And then I would say, describe your characters to each other. Describe what you look like, right? This gives me now a second to buy a little time to think about what I'm going to do next. Okay. Now let's go to comments real quick. Charlie says, what I always prep is a standard form where I have the stats of my players, where I have my encounters lined up. There I have the most basic stats and the monsters, like the thing you need while running fight. It's a digital GM screen. So even if I got no monsters or enemies, I can fill the blanks fast if needed to make it up. Yeah, actually, that's a really good way to do it. In fact, it's not such a bad idea to just have like, I guess that's what the monster manual's for, right? It's like, oh, these are monsters I could run. Like if I wanted to run monster, I could find easy monster, run it. John says, it's like playing a song with no prep. I can do it because I have a quarter century of guitar lessons and an undergrad degree in guitar performance. Yeah, no, that's super true, actually. It's super true. But I don't recommend it if you've only had a year of lessons. Yeah, no, that's kind of true, actually. It would be pretty rough to run off the cuff in D&D if you don't have like the experience to do it. With that being said, here's what I would do. So it's like then players like introduce each other. And then again, just off the cuff, I say, you hear sounds coming from outside the camp. And the players might say, hey, do we know why we're here? And what I would say to that is I would say, you are all suffering from what seems to be an acute case of amnesia. You all wake up and you all realize the same thing. You don't remember how you got here. You remember, your background information. You remember your skill proficiencies. You know the languages, you know your name. You know how to like dress yourself and clean your weapons, but you do not remember the series of events that led you here. And then I would say, everyone roll me a wisdom check, just a straight wisdom check. And then maybe they'd roll a wisdom check. And then I would, make a DC of like 15. Everyone who got over 15, I would say, you do have one memory though, the cloaked figure. And you remember him carrying a staff that had a green glowing lantern at the top, and you remember him saying something. You remember him saying, when destiny calls, and then he smirks. You remember the smirk. You can't remember his face, but you remember the toothy smirk. He would say, calamity answers, and then it goes blank. Like that's all you remember, but that's a very hazy memory, right? So but then I would say, roll me a perception check. And everyone would roll. And then I would say, and again, this is just off the cuff. I'm just talking about this right now as if I sat down to run a game. You hear a sound coming from outside. sounds like ravens. And then maybe the players will go outside and they see there's a corpse lying in front of their tent, half covered in snow. There are a bunch of ravens on the corpse eating it, basically. Okay. And then it's like, what is this? They search the person, whatever, right? So I'm just saying we're going in this direction. Now we're having like a little investigation, discovery type section, right? And they can look around the campsite. I might describe the campsite, whatever. But I'm just going to go with what I'm thinking of first. What the first things that I can think of, I'm going to roll with them. I'm going to embrace them, because what I don't want to do is sit there and be like, is that a good idea? Is that what I should do? Right? I want the pacing to be fun. I want it to be exciting. And here's the thing I think that I've learned in GMing. Players are the vehicles of the story. They're really what the story is about. As a GM, we're filling in the pixels around them, right? But what we don't want to do is just kind of like pause and like not have things going on. It's better to, if you're put in the situation where you're running something off the cuff, it's better to trust yourself and kind of leap at those intuitive ideas than it is to kind of like question them and then have those long periods of kind of like no momentum and no action. Now, with that being said, I'm going to go to the comments here. Charlie says, it's just an Excel file that I have where I have in a complete overview everything I need. Yeah. So it sounds like, Charlie, you kind of have like a GM kit that you bring with you, like your own spell book for adventure that you can pull out whenever, you need to, whether you've planned or not. John says, and even so, there are certain songs I wouldn't want to play. Let's stick to classics that I've at least heard. Hopefully my metaphor tracks. Yeah, no, totally. I play music too, so that totally tracks. But now let's take it a step further. What about writing a song? Someone's like, write a song off the cuff. Surprisingly difficult to do unless you are very confident and you trust yourself a lot, right? You're going to probably question yourself. You're going to be afraid of your ideas being stupid. You're going to be afraid of people thinking you look stupid, that kind of thing. Okay, so this is also a lesson we can take with us when we GM in general, even if we've prepped. Going for that first intuition, not a Jester, not a clown says lag spikes are brutal today. Am I having lag spikes? Is my video like lagging pretty badly? Someone let me know. Charlie says, have faith in your leading skills and try to give your players a small piece of information. If they feel like to deeper investigate, they start asking questions and you provide the answers. John says my video is fine. Oh, okay. Maybe a bit of lag indeed over here as well. It's my bad reception area. Oh, okay. So we might have some different areas just having a little lag. Hopefully it's not the whole thing. But anyway, okay. So this is a lesson we can take with us when we're running games too. We can go into games with the confidence of being like, I'm going to go for my intuition. There's a lot of times when going for your first intuition is the best decision you can make as a GM. This, I think, is really key when we're running something improv, like if we're going completely improv, but it's also important for rewriting our previous ideas. Sometimes you'll have like an idea planned out, but then a character will do something. You'll be like, oh no, this has to happen. We're throwing out the whole script. This has to happen. I don't know if like you guys ever do that. Let me know if you do that, but that's how I operate, like that almost all the time, which is why I tend to keep my session goals super simple, because I know it's going to happen a lot. Let's see here. Garrick says some yes, and ads are popping up and cutting away from you. Are they really? Do ads pop up during lives? That's interesting. Charlie says go with your gut. Pro tip number 1. Absolutely. Chris says been there, done that. Okay, so now let's talk about basically point number 2, which is give players a lot of spotlight time. Okay, so if you're running a game without any prep, sometimes you can do kind of like a reactive storytelling thing until you get your feet under you. And this is actually good for sessions where your plans get thrown away too. Is like you just really give players time. Nothing is happening, but you're not taking breaks from your running of the game. you're just putting the focus, you keep putting it back on players, let them do things, let them choose things, let them find things, right? So you give players the spotlight as often as possible, and as they're doing things, you might get an idea, and then that idea can come out, you let the players react to it, right? To be really honest, this is how we should probably run all games, make players the spotlight. With that being said, let's see here. Charlie said, oh no, Chris says, been there, done that. Garrick says, not in the other live streams, only this one. Oh, you mean the ads? Now Jester says, as a player, especially if we have a large party, I let the DMGM know my character is busy crafting something or doing a part-time job to help give other players the spotlight. Yeah, actually, that's a super cool way to be as a player. Just kind of like you maybe want to accomplish things and you don't have to like role play it. So you let the GM know that as like a just like a common courtesy. It's super, super nice, actually. Very, very good thing to do to give the other players some spotlight time. But put the spotlight on the players as much as you can. That's basically tip number 2. And so that's going to do 2 things. It's going to free up some bandwidth for you as the GM to be able to think about things while players are doing things, but also this is fun for the players because they're doing things. They're getting to do things, and that's kind of the whole point. So this is a really good thing. Now, at some point, you're going to need to decide on a conflict for this session. That doesn't necessarily have to be a combat. A lot of times the conflict is a combat of some kind, or it could be like a deep role play, storyline moment, or something like that. In this case, I'm just thinking, well, polar bear, a big, like maybe a dire polar bear comes by and attacks the group, but they see that it's wearing an amulet, a golden amulet. Why is it wearing that? That's a good question. Maybe as a GM, I don't know why it's wearing that. I just thought of it because I think to myself, I'm going to need something to take the story a little bit further, make it a little more interesting. So I'm going to put this amulet on the bear. And what I'm thinking right now is that the amulet allows someone else to see through the bear's eyes and kind of suggest to it to do things. So maybe some kind of like evil druid somewhere nearby is using this bear to patrol their territory, and they're attacking these people because they're strangers. And then if the people get this amulet, maybe they have magic, like maybe they have an identify spell, maybe they have means to like use this amulet to figure out what's going on, and they might track it back to where it came from. So this could provide like a little bit of storyline for the session. And this is, again, just what I thought of, but mostly giving players the spotlight. But you want to be thinking ahead about, okay, what's the conflict going to be? And then what is the story of the session going to be? What are the story opportunities here? You want to present those opportunities to the players. And a lot of times, once again, just go with your gut. Try to jump at the first thing that comes to mind. It might sound zany. It might sound crazy. Just do it the best you can. Oftentimes, that's going to yield the best results in my experience. John says, I feel like the best no prep scenario is actually preemptive prep. Like always have a couple of dungeons in your back pocket that you could run at the drop of a hat. Charlie says using the ultimate plot randomizer. Heck yeah. Run the ultimate plot randomizer. You can download that. I don't even think that's in my description today. I don't usually put that in my live videos. John says the time lapse between the prep and session will make it fresh for you too. Yes, that's true, actually. I mean, being able to prep, having time to prep is always better. To be really honest, is always better. There is kind of a fun magic of running from the like off the cuff. It's just that it's a little bit disrespectful to the players to not prep on purpose. And it's also a little bit like irresponsible, I guess, not to prep. It is a little fun when you get put in those situations, though. America the Uneducated says prep is what your players' choices on their sheets and what they like at the table. Okay. So that sounds kind of like almost like an argument for doing less prep and letting the players' choices kind of be the prep for the session. That's very interesting. If you want to expound on that a little bit more, feel free to write that in the chat. That sounds like an actually very interesting outlook. Okay, so but anyway, so you got to be thinking about that conflict. You got to be thinking about kind of the story as you go toward the second half of the session. Also keep in mind that player choices are probably going to derail that, which is totally fine. You actually want players to do things like that are kind of unexpected in a sense, because that will create a narrative of its own and kind of drive the story. And I feel like that's a little bit hard to when I say that, I'm not sure if that's understandable for everyone. I feel like it's a little bit difficult to explain that concept without like showing it. Um, but that's basically like player driven narrative, letting players kind of drive the narrative, and then you just fill in the pixels around them. There's an element of what are they looking for, what are they trying to do, and then you use that to help inform like 40 to 50% of what they're going to find or what's going to happen. And that gives you a big advantage in kind of staying ahead of your players, is using the player desires, player expectations, what the players are going for, what they're searching for, what they're trying to do, using that as fuel for what you are going to do. I'm going to read some of these comments here real quick. Garrick says, if nobody that day played in them, just think back to a scenario problem you already presented once. That's actually true. You can reuse material. Absolutely. John says, I've played for a GM who sometimes didn't prep sessions. He'd brag about it as if it was a badge of honor. But the truth is we could totally tell those sessions sucked. Yeah, that is, man, so I feel like that is not a good way to be. Like, that's very cringy. And I feel like it begs the question, is the players' time not worth the respect of coming in prepared? Like, I feel like a GM should arrive prepared, just like players should arrive prepared. They should arrive with their sheets ready. They should have their dice, right? Everyone should show up ready to participate to the greatest extent possible. I agree, John, that is a pretty rough time. America the Uneducated says, most encounters should revolve around their sheet choices to give them an edge, whether the encounter is a fight, social trap, puzzle, investigating a scene, etc. Oh, so you mean basically like designing encounters kind of based on what the play or the characters do really well is kind of sounds like what you're saying, which makes sense. Actually, that does make sense. Kind of catering the adventure to the talents and skills of the group. I totally see what you're saying there. Yeah, that does make sense. And especially if you're going off the cuff, this can be a good actually source of inspiration to fuel some ideas for what goes forward. So for example, you might take a look at a character sheet, realize they have a really high deception skill, and then think to yourself, what does that inspire me to make? For me, it inspires me to think there's a big, like they find a herd of yak and there's a shepherd. This shepherd is very distrusting, basically thinks that they are marauders and will not tell them the location of the village. Whether or not they are marauders doesn't really matter. And the deception skill, they may or may not use it, but that's just what I thought when I heard deception skill in my own mind. It's just, I was like, okay, be creative. What does that inspire you to think? I think of a herd of yak, and then like a Goliath shepherd who has a big stick, and his hair is like cut like a friar, like Friar Tuck. It's like bald in the middle and it just goes around. So maybe he also doubles as the priest of the local village. Anyway, just something. It's actually kind of a fun character that I haven't thought of before. But Charlie says, provide minimal information, be a bit vague about a situation, and let your players ask for deeper info. Chris Perkins has some good examples how to do this, how to DM video. Oh yeah, totally. Chris Perkins is excellent, and watching Chris Perkins will teach anyone how to be a better GM, I feel like. But provide minimal information, be a bit vague about a situation, and let your players ask for deeper info is super good advice, actually, because providing minimal information and being a little vague also keeps things a little mysterious, and it allows the players' imaginations to run a little bit. And when they share that with you, you can use that as fuel to keep going, especially if it involves something they're planning on doing or something they desire or a direction they want to go in. For example, they may say, we need to find a village around here. You might not have even been thinking about a village before they said that, but then you think there probably is a village. Yes, I think there is a village around here. It's like I didn't even know a second ago, but that checks out and it makes sense. Now, there's another element to this that I think is important to bring up, and that is that. Okay, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this. You want player choices to matter, and you don't want players to feel like there's this like a lack of believability, and you can run into the danger of that with improv. Like if you're just doing everything off the cuff and it's all like a theater presentation, the players might kind of feel like this doesn't feel very immersive at all. This kind of feels like you're just doing random things and we're reacting to it. That is not what we want to do. We want there to feel like there's a solid structure, right? So, and that is actually built on a story structure, a narrative structure. So, like in my example where I said they come out of the tent and they find the body in the snow, right? And then I might say, you find a note. They pick it up, and it's like, what does this say? And then I tell them what it says, whatever, right? So I'm trying to build a narrative structure where there's an expectation that there are things going on the players don't understand, but when the players discover it, it will deepen the story or provide illumination. It's not just like, you walk out, there's a peacock in a coat. It asks you if you want to buy a McDouble, right? It's like, and then it opens its coat and it has a whole bunch of hamburgers. Like, it's not just like, we don't want to just be crazy and zany just to throw things at the players. We want to start right away from the first word. We want to build a solid, believable narrative structure that will capture player interest and build immersion for them. They want to feel like this is a real believable scenario. When I say believable, they don't have to actually believe it like 100%. We're obviously playing D&D, but within the realm of the game, we have to build that belief that this scenario is real for the character, and that makes it more interesting and engaging. And it makes it feel like it's not just a random GM throwing things against the wall session, because that it feels like, what's the point of that? Like, we're basically just here as entertainment fodder for this GM at that point, which is not fun. And that does not feel fun. Charlie says 100% player agency. Garrick says double down on where the players' questions and comments lead. I totally agree with that. Garrick says they will help point you in a direction they like. I totally agree with that. Not a jester, not a clown says peacock in a trench coat selling hamburgers sounds better than being attacked by dire salmon. Well, I don't know. I've never thought of a dire salmon before, but I'm going to be honest. I don't think that sounds like a terrible encounter. Maybe they're trying to cross the frozen lake and these giant salmon are leaping out and trying to knock them into the water for some reason. Maybe it's accidental. It's nesting season or whatever. Anyway, dire salmon. I've never had a dire salmon, but I have had a patriarchal catfish. The players in one of my games, my core group, one time came into this little village, and it's just like a little village. They were stopping here just for the night or whatever. And they walk in and everyone's like, oh, hello. It's like kind of a weird village. It's like, why is this village weird? And then they're like, are you here to pay homage to the patriarchal catfish? And that they were like, what are you talking about right now? And they're like, oh, he's the patron of our village. He's over 100 years old. He is truly the father of all of the catfish in the surrounding rivers and lakes. We revere him as a sort of, not as a god, but more like a good luck token, like a mascot. And in fact, they had there were like images of catfish on all the signs. It's like the town mascot. And it was just a really weird, it was a really weird thing. They ended up having like a telepathic communication with it, I think, which is kind of funny. And it was just a one-off, like weird little town. They decided not to stay there. They decided to leave. Let's see here. All right, we've covered the comments so far. Yeah, we're kind of coming up on, I guess, the end of this. Basically, what I think is most important here is that narrative structure, making it believable, going with your instincts, following player agency, like letting the players kind of choose a direction and then honoring that and then like fleshing it out, staying one step ahead. And another thing is putting the spotlight on the players. And then I really have to come back around to trust yourself, be confident. Like if you can trust yourself and be confident, maybe your encounters will not be perfect. Maybe your NPCs will not be perfect. Maybe the location will not be perfect. The plot might have some holes in it. But if you can do the things you're trying to do and try to do them as good as you can, right? And you can have the players have their agency, and then you can also uphold that structure, that narrative structure that makes the players believe there is a plot here. And when I say plot, I don't mean like a linear plot. I just mean, this feels like a real place with stuff to discover. If you can get them to feel that way instead of the GM is just throwing random things at them, you can be successful with this. But that is probably the most important aspect of it. Whispering Wisp says, I love weird little towns. Yeah, I do too. America the Uneducated says there's never nothing going on, even when there's nothing going on. That is super true. And I feel like when players understand that about your game, if you can make that known to them, that really deepens immersion for them. All right, that's going to wrap it up. Hey, I have my link to the Discord in the pinned comment. If any of you have not joined my Discord, you should jump in there. We talk about this kind of stuff and we launch contests. In fact, today we are launching the next content creation contest in the Discord. So if you'd be interested in jumping in, creating stuff, joining the contest, please do that. And with that being said, that's going to be a wrap. Thank you all for showing up. Thank you for the great comments, great conversation. I appreciate all of you. Roll some D100s for me at your next game, and I will see you all later.